to Healing from the Ground Up. I'm Eric Greenleaf, and today I'll be talking with Dr. Leslie Gray. Leslie is a clinical psychologist and a founder of the therapeutic practices of shamanic psychology and eco-psychology, and directs the Woodfish Foundation. Leslie, as psychologists, you and I work with people in an odd area of experience, somewhere between what is seen, the behaviors, the histories and characteristics of people, and the unseen, which we approximate by the life of dreams, visions, and even feelings, because we never see love, yet we feel it. And I was wondering if you have a way of conceiving of the seen and unseen worlds in your own work with people.
I tend to discuss it in terms of ordinary and non-ordinary reality.
Yeah.
When it comes to the shamanic work. And I tend to discuss it in terms of the unseen interconnectedness of life when it comes to eco-psychology. They both have seen and unseen aspects. There's also something, though, that happens where, and this probably has happened with you, where you comment on something in the work with a client across from you that has been tacit for maybe many sessions or maybe just that session, and it's just the right thing. So there's simultaneously on their part the surprise of hearing something spoken that hasn't been spoken about, and the validation of some experience that they've had that no one acknowledges.
Yes, and that can feel spooky, like spooky action at a distance. Or how did you know that about me?
Yeah.
Or, gee, I was just thinking that same thing myself. As when people bring in dreams that have proved prophetic. And they say, I knew it wasn't just an ordinary dream, and then the car did slide in the mud, or I did get that phone call from a relative. And I know it's a very hard question in epistemology, anything, where the information comes from when you can't see a direct line for it. So I thought I would ask you in terms of one of the elements of shamanic work, finding a totem animal or a guardian animal, however you describe it. And do you think of that finding and the effect of the animal on the patient in a literal or metaphorical way, or somewhere in between? Do you think there is somewhere an observable spirit that then enters the conversation, or do you think otherwise about it?
Well, there's seeing and there's seeing. And all you have to do is put an R on the end of the word see, and you have seer. And all of a sudden we're in the dimension where you can see spirits.
Oh.
So when you, or where you can do divination, or where you can access ordinarily hidden realms and bring back power, information, or healing to help the patient with their life. I'm not willing to allow the word observable to only apply to one world. You know, it's just different kinds of seeing.
I agree with this entirely, and I like your use of we're seers, even just in our dreams. Mm-hmm. And the hard question, what are we seeing? As in near-death experiences, are we going to claim that we are seeing the other side, or are our brains producing a dream for us that's consistent person to person over all humans? Or does it matter? Or
Well, I actually don't think it does matter. I mean, not in our work,
Yes.
because what the number one thing always is to help the person. And
Yes.
so whatever philosophy we may have about what we're doing, or even any science we may have, is irrelevant in psychotherapy.
Yeah.
You do what works and what really helps the person. But, you know, sometimes when I'm working with people, they will get stuck on this question when they're journeying. They'll be journeying actually and having an extraordinary journey and see all sorts of things, but then they'll stop on this question of, is this happening or am I making it happen?
Yeah.
And what I often ask them is if in the entire history of Western philosophy, from the pre-Socratics to Wittgenstein, anyone has ever been able to answer that question about ordinary reality.
That's true.
So why hold non-ordinary reality to a higher standard than you're holding ordinary reality?
Yes, I think that's exactly right. We see, we're moved, and we act. And the question of the status of what we're seeing is not always important.
Well, one of the problems is we're measuring a thing with the thing itself.
Yeah.
You know, the instrument is exactly what we're measuring when we're trying to answer that question. So it kind of can't be done.
I think that's right, and importantly so, that we're at a limit of what we can consciously know or determine whenever something happens.
Yes.
And when it happens, when there's a strong dream, a vision, an encounter that we can't explain, a feeling whose origins we can't track, and we know it to be real and effective in our lives, then we have to do what Wittgenstein said, which is to accept the forms of life.
Mm-hmm.
And that which must be accepted, he said, includes the human face,
Mm-hmm.
and as well as sort of categories of thought, numbers, and so forth. I like very much in cultures that we're familiar with, non-Western cultures, for want of a better word, but in Western cultures too, where there are ritual means or ceremonial means to bring the unseen into vision. So in the New York Times, they had pictures of Mali funerary masks that are danced, that bring the dead into the campfire circle. In Bali, someone will put on a mask of the god and then be possessed interiorly by the spirit of that god, which dances her around or has her speak. And it's felt and experienced that way. Something, the people say, took them over or sat in them or like that. And I think maybe by extension for things like a guardian spirit or an animal found on a vision quest, that it gives something to see to forces, activities, experiences that are otherwise hard to contemplate. If we can see the face of our beloved, we have reactions that make sense to us.
Mm-hmm.
Or if we can see the spirits of the dead in the form of the mass dance.
Yeah.
Is what I think, but...
Yeah, well, I think most shamanic cultures have some way or another of doing this, whether it's painting yourself as an animal and dancing, or kachinas, or as they have in the Southwest, all sorts of kachinas. I think there's an understanding in these cultures. It's a very interesting kind of understanding, because these tribes are sometimes so small that you know that that's your uncle out there with that mask on.
Yes.
But at the same time, there's this temporary taking on that allows you to see this person as actually being the spirit.
Yes. That's exactly right. In village cultures, they know who's behind the mask. And it's not the Wizard of Oz, it's Uncle so-and-so, Uncle Wayan is there. But still, in the same...
It's both at the same time.
It's both at the same time. So it has that liminal kind of aspect. It's as though going from one place to another, or being in a boundary or a border, where it's both and, neither or. Those places where very powerful spiritual and emotional events take place. In the same way that the example I like best is falling in love, because no one can explain it. Everyone can say it's there or it's not. Everyone hopefully has experienced it and been undone by it, because it's transformative or transitional. But nobody can define it. Or put, you can write novels, but you can't say, oh yeah, that's it for in this definitional way that we can say, that's a car, that's a horse. Can't do that with love exactly, I think.
No, you can't. I think for many, love is sort of the ultimate example of the whole being more than the sum of its parts.
Yes.
You've got those two people there, and then there's something more.
Yeah.
That you and another person would absolutely not have, even if all the countable aspects of each of you were similar or the same.
Yeah, which is why you can make good humor out of online dating, which attempts to match up people by characteristics. When people relate, as they say colloquially, through chemistry. I either like you or don't like you, and I don't know why, and like that.
Well, you learn that, well, there is the saying, beauty is only skin deep, but ugly goes right to the bone.
I never heard that one. A Native American expression.
No, not really. Not really. There's another one I love, talking about the world of appearances.
Yeah.
There was a great yogi who was teaching his students and his disciples, and he was sitting under a tree, and it was a sunny day, and he was telling them that all that is around us is just Maya. It's just mere appearance, this world. And as he was saying that, a tiger came along. And the yogi jumped up and climbed up the tree. And the students who were stunned for a bit, and then finally realized they were in danger and ran. But then when the tiger had left, they came back and they said to him, well, why did you run up that tree so fast? You were the first one up. I mean, isn't this all just the world of appearance? You're not really living what you preach. And he said, on the contrary, I only appeared to run up into the tree.
Yeah. I like that a whole lot.
Because la vida es sueño y aún los sueños son. Life is a dream, and even dreams are dreams. We even only dream that we dream, that's the last line of the great Lope de Vega play. Life is la vida es sueño. And the king, the son of the king is locked in a tower as a child and raised there, and then there's an overthrow of the kingdom and he's brought back out, but he spent his whole life never being outside that tower, and he asks himself, well, I don't know if I'm in that tower dreaming that I'm outside of it, or if I truly am outside of it.
Yeah. And something you said earlier strikes me too, Leslie, the way in which familiar or unfamiliar images and activities come to represent whole structures more than one individual. The living and the dead are here together. It's Uncle Wayan, but it's also the goddess Rangda at the same time.
The simultaneity of the sacred and the profane, I think, is one of the foremost characteristics of shamanically oriented cultures.
Yes.
And in fact, it's almost a necessity, because without it, you don't have the totality. And without the totality, nothing is sacred.
Yes. And in your work, is there a way that you present those, I'll call them, for want of a better word, facts of the spirit, to people who are very secular, very determined that their world stops and ends with their skin, that they're intrapsychic creatures with analytic abilities, and, modern people?
I rarely get into discussions about this because once they've had the experience of journeying, the questioning stops. Once, usually. But if someone does push it, I start to ask them, well, what exactly do you think is real?
Yes.
Is it this table here? Well, if you take an electron microscope, if I say, if it is this table, is it because it's solid? And they'll say yes. Well, if you take an electron microscope, it's not solid. It's moving, and there's more distance between the atoms inside of here than there is between the stars in the sky. So, and also I sometimes ask people to envision something like this table in time-lapse photography, like 500 years before today, and then 500 years after today, and to just see it very quickly, and then everything, of course, is doing that. So exactly what is the permanent, the fixed, the real, the seeable, the observable?
Yeah, and that kind of discussion stands alongside the one about, and the more difficult in some ways, one of, well, how real are the dreams or the spirits? Do they have a separate reality from my mind?
I actually think that is not a for shamanic cultures and tribal peoples, how real something isn't the question. I think they're sort of spiritually pragmatic. The question is, does it work?
Yes.
Does it heal? Does it help us find game? Does it make us have a bountiful? And not very many people are. The question itself is a very Western European kind of question.
Oh, I agree about that. In Bali, if you ask somebody why something is so, they start with a phrase like, the world rests on the back of a turtle. And then they will go through the whole genealogy, the myth of origin, and never quite get around to, well, why do you have 4 buildings in this particular space instead of 2 like in the other place? And even people who send their kids to Stanford respond that way, and in those other cultures, because, as you say, there's no difference between what is real and what isn't, unless somebody is insane and thinks the table is piled with money and they're really starving or something.
Well, I think in the West, people tend to have the notion that what they know and see and experience is not a story. And other people's versions of reality, primal people's, are stories or myths or whatever, but they're not stories. There was, at a school in San Francisco, there was some money left by a very wealthy benefactor, and for a study of the cosmos-based department. But the person insisted that it be called the Center for the Study of the Story of the Universe. And the physicists really, some of the physicists, were very bothered by this. They felt it reduced and minimized the seriousness of their science. But science is a story. And it's also a story that's constantly changing, and it's a political story that people fight each other over, and it is a story that has economic motivation behind it as well. So it's definitely a story.
It's what political correspondents call competing narratives. Right. Well, and in the cultures we're referring to, there are disputes about what's going on. but about which story applies.
Exactly.
So somebody got sick, was that because of a virus, because they know what viruses are? Or was it because of a black magic done to a member of the family, or are the gods displeased? And part of the obligation of the healer is to sort that through with the patient and say, well, yes, if you do these ritual and ceremonial acts, that will take care of the god's anger. Or, gee, you better get to see the surgeon, this looks bad.
See, I value that way of thinking equally with the Western way of thinking. It's an old difference in what you think science is. You either test, in the incidences that you mentioned, what's being tested is relative validity.
Yes.
Instead of proving the truth of something or not. And in the West, there is this notion that you can actually prove something. And so all of the experimentation is about proving something in a certain level of probability, 0.05, 0.01, and they immediately dismiss that and just proceed as if it weren't a level of probability, but as if it were a level of fact. So the concern is to be able to be the one who's telling the truth.
Yes.
Whereas in many other cultures, the concern is to find out of these two methodologies, which one is the most effective. And they're both interesting ways of going about understanding what's the best way to live while we're here on this earth walk. But it's unfortunate that the overemphasis on one is contributing to a lot of our problems, in my humble opinion.
It's a good opinion. Yeah, it is, because then we're ignorant of the story that we're all creating together. We think that we could come upon the one truth.
Yeah.
Or even, as my questions imply but don't intend, what is more real or less real? When you respond to those kinds of questions by saying what is more effective for the person on her path, or for the community, or for humankind.
There's even the Christian tradition has this idea that Paul said, walk by faith and not by sight.
Mm-hmm.
That is a direct reference to different ways of seeing. Aboriginal Australians call that seeing with the strong eye.
Oh, how nice.
Yeah.
Seeing with the strong eye.
Seeing with the strong eye. Or to see with the eye of the heart, as it's called in Le Petit Prince, in The Little Prince.
Yes.
There's that constant repetition of this idea of to see with the eye of the heart.
Yeah, that's really what we're discussing, I think, that a different way of seeing, so that the seer sees with her heart, sees the, I like to think of it oddly as the structure of things, the interconnections of people and communities, generations and families, and even aspects of ourselves that are unself-conscious, or our own histories or futures. So we operate in this kind of murkiness relative to science, let's say, all through our lives.
Well,
but it's a clarity of purpose, feeling, and connection, rather than of some, quote, objective truth. It is our truth, who I love, who I'm related with, the work we do.
we work with
like
the back side of the embroidery. Science
Yes.
works with the observable top side of the embroidery, but if you lose the back side, everything unravels.
Yeah. So we're interested in the connections,
Exactly.
the way it fits together.
It's exactly like this.
Like
Look
that.
at how different that is.
Yeah, it is.
On this side, it's a beautiful pattern, and on the back side, you can see that it's...
Well, you can
well,
see
you can
the
see
stitches.
the stitches.
Yes.
Exactly. But try to have this side without the hidden stitches. It's impossible.
In ceremonies in Bali, I very much like going backstage before and after, where the people who are about to be taken by the gods are dressing and chatting, smoking a clove cigarette, shooing their kids away, stuff like that. And then afterwards, completely drenched, exhausted, and done.
Yeah.
Because it's been such a complete experience. And I know that in your shamanic work, if someone has been on such a journey with you, or accompanied by you, they can be spent and exhausted and changed afterwards.
Yeah.
It's enormous uses of energy and of attentiveness and of wonder, things we don't get to do much. We all lead rather measured lives in modern Western society. Go to work, come home, have dinner, and some of the experiences that we're referencing can go on for days or over time for very long periods. These searching or possession or dreamy experiences, as I like to think of them. So they're very intense experiences, and again, in the same way that we never forget falling in love, you don't forget a powerful dream or an exchange with a healer such as yourself, in which your own ability to explore the unseen is made something you can see, is made visible and interactive. So you get to see the stitchery a little bit. You get to see forms of where things come from. So thank you very much for coming and speaking with me. We will have a part 2 to our discussion today, and in that part you will have the opportunity to interview me, which I've been looking forward to. So I hope our viewers will tune in when that show is shown as well and see both halves of this interesting conversation. We hope to see you all then on Healing from the Ground Up.